you properly, Graham Stanley is the British Council's English for Education Systems leader for the Americas, and he's now in Mexico. Yeah. And he's editor of Remote Teaching, author of Language Learning with Technology, and co-author of Digital Play, Computer Games and Language Aims. Graham is also a newsletter editor for the ITEFL LTC, this is Learning Technology Special Interest Group, yeah? I'm right. And Graham is very active in our RPG and LT group. He's very active in this group, and he runs a lot of games, and he creates games for us to play. And last Thursday, we've just played a wonderful, absolutely fantastic game about treasure on an island. And today, Graham is going to talk about storytelling games for our students. Okay, let's greet Graham with smiles. Okay, so yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elena. Thank you, everybody. And it is very early here in Mexico City, but I usually get up at 5 o'clock, so it's just a little bit early for me, this, but it's good to be here anyway. Let me, without further ado, let me share my screen. So hopefully you can all see that.
Yeah, it's fine. We can see it. Thank you.
Great. So as Elena said in her introduction, I'll be talking about interactive storytelling games for English language students in this presentation. And I'll be hoping to involve you in actually playing one or two of those games, depending on the time. So I hope you can participate. You will need to participate in the chat, but usually what you will do is place, obviously with your students, you would get them to speak. I don't know if we can do that here or not. Maybe we can give it a go if people do want to try. But interactive storytelling, what is it? Well, for me, it's something that I came across, it's a method that I came across quite some years ago and started using it in my classroom. And I found it was a very effective way of engaging students and encouraging them to speak better in English. And it also can enrich learners' vocabulary. And the great thing is that it can be easily adapted to a variety of age groups and levels of learners. So let me move on. Right, so the presentation has the following parts to it. First, I'll be looking at storytelling in general and asking you to write in the chat. And then we'll look at interactive stories, the techniques, and an example story, followed by ideas if you want to write your own. And then finally, we look at role-playing games in general, because I think that is something I'm particularly interested in. As Elena said, I've been active in the RPG and the LT group since I found it. And I'm very interested in writing my own games, a couple of which I'll share with you today. And we'll have a look at examples of interactive storytelling in role-playing games and techniques to encourage students to speak. Okay, so storytelling. What is your experience of storytelling? Do you use stories in the class? How do you approach it? Perhaps you can write a few words in the chat now about your experience of storytelling with your students. So do you use storytelling? If you use it, do you use it just with students who are young, or do you use it with all age groups? What would be the advantage of using it with adults, for example? If you want to write into the chat, and I'll pick up on some of those ideas as we go along, hopefully. My experience is, I think I started really, as most teachers do, storytelling with children. Really enjoyed it, but I did have an experience of using role-playing games and playing them as a young adult, as a teenager and young adult, and I really enjoyed it. And basically, the kind of role-playing games I was doing was all about co-creating stories. And so at various points, I did try to adapt them to my students' lessons with varying degrees of success, but not very actively. And I can see that some of you have the similar experience, I think. And Marina said that she reformats stories into role plays, which is great. Yeah, so I have moved on from there, I think, and think that storytelling is something that is very effective for using, as I said, with adults as well. And in particular, the interactive story that I'm going to present today is one for adults, although it could be used with younger people as well. So what is an interactive story? Now, I think the definition is there. An interactive story is a guided short story in text form. It's a speaking activity with students working in pairs, and the storyteller has a handout of the story and reads it. And they stop to ask the listener questions as they go along. And the story continues when the storyteller is happy with those responses, or they ask the listener to supply further responses. So that is a definition of what Mark White's interactive story was. Now, Mark is a teacher who has a website. This is many years old. I don't think he's updated the website in some years, but I found it a very interesting technique. There are recordings of him telling stories and his students playing this game because it's something that can be done in pairs. I immediately liked the idea when I came across it, and I decided to write one of my own to try out with my students. The reason for doing that is because a lot of the stories that Mark had shared on his website were very context specific, and because he worked in Japan, they tend to deal with Japanese culture or be things that would appeal to Japanese students. I lived in Barcelona, Spain at the time, and I thought I wanted something a bit more general, or a bit more the context to be more specific to my students, or less specific to Japan, really. So I decided to write one called The Small Town Photographer. And this is a story I'm going to ask you to try out with me now. And again, you can either pick up the microphone, we can try and see if that works and respond to this, or maybe better, I don't know, you can write your responses in the chat. Yeah, I think in the chat. But you would, as I said with earlier, you would ask your students to do this in the classroom or online. You would ask them to speak. You can either do this in pairs. You can give the text, the written text, to a student and ask them to play the role of the storyteller and to play in pairs or in small groups with students. Or, as we're doing today, the teacher can actually read the story and ask the students, or yourselves in this case, for the responses. So we'll do that format, but it is a way of getting students experience and practice of reading text aloud. And pronunciation is something, if you're doing that as a teacher, you can go around and monitor. Vocabulary and language, well, you can actually write the text or take texts and expand upon them from the books that you're using to practice certain structures or vocabulary sets, etc. So I think it's very easily adaptable to whatever you're doing in the classroom. So this story that I'm going to tell you is called The Small Town Photographer. And it's something I wrote back in 2005 when I first came across this idea. But I think it still stands up. So everybody, a photographer, what is his name? What's the name of the photographer? Write in the chat the name of the photographer. Tom, thank you, Svetlana. Yeah, Tom, the photographer, lives in a small town. What's the name of the town? What's the name of the town? And Maya, yeah, you could use plays or stories that are readily available and very easily adapt them. We can talk about it once you've seen the example. Liverpool. Yeah, except Liverpool's not really a small town, it's a city. So maybe another one. I think Woodland has been suggested. So let's say Tom, the photographer, lives in a place, a small town called Woodland. Where is Woodland? Which country, which part of the world? The USA or near Liverpool. I'm going to go with Michael's answer there. So Tom, the photographer, lives in a small town called Woodland near Liverpool, where he's successfully made a good living for many years. Now, in the window of his shop, he proudly displays some of his wedding photographs he's taken of happy couples over the years. He's very fond of one photograph in particular. Why? What does it show? What does this photograph show? This is, of course, where you'll get responses. If you're playing it with a class of students, you get responses of students suggesting things and you address them. Again, if you were playing online, as a lot of us are doing these days, and then you would do the same thing, or students would do it in pairs. So I've got some answers there. What does this photograph show? It shows a bride crying. No, it's a much happier photograph. I'm sorry, it's not a bride crying. His sister's wedding. It could have been, but no, it isn't. It's nothing, it's not related to him. His collection of wooden soldiers, Hugh Miller. No, it's not. He wouldn't put a photograph of a collection of wooden soldiers in his window because his principal business is wedding photographs, going out and taking pictures of weddings. So he's going to be displaying the best of his work in his window. And there's one photograph in particular that has pride of place because of a reason. What is that photograph? Crying from happiness. Good try, Anastasia, but no. So I'll tell you. It's a photograph showing a couple standing on a hill on their own. There's nobody else in the photograph. The sunset is amazing, and there's a tree, and the couple are embracing themselves. Oh, sorry, they're embracing, not themselves, they're embracing, and it's their wedding day. And the brilliant red sunset in the background of the picture makes he's very happy of it. And this photograph has become very important to Tom, the photographer, because it's particularly good. But also, as soon as he put that photograph in the window, he started noticing an increase in the number of customers his studio received, especially for weddings. He doesn't do just weddings, but wedding photographs are the main types of photographs he does. And lots of people came in to the shop inquiring about the wedding photographic services, and they always comment upon it. Some other good suggestions there, Maya, with Tom getting married to his two big loves, one after the other. That's a good suggestion. And Svetlana also saying it shows him getting married. So he's convinced that the photograph isn't something he could recapture again. He's actually tried. A lot of the wedding couples who ask for him to take photographs at their weddings have asked to go to that same place in the evening as the sun is setting and for him to capture the same photograph. And he's tried a number of times and they've always been very happy with the results, but he's never thought that any of the photographs he's taken at the same place have been as good as that particularly one photograph he was able to capture that wedding years ago. So he's kept that in the window of his shop for all those years. He thinks what? What is his explanation? Why does he think that particular photograph ended up being lucky or magical? Maya's suggesting he was emotionally connected to the photograph. Well, yeah, I think that's true. Is there any other reasons? Why has this photograph turned out so well? What do you think? By chance, yeah, Katrinkans thinks that it was a special event, a special day, something in the air, something magical. And yes, that's exactly what Tom thinks. No, he was the photographer of this photograph. Sorry, there's a suggestion, but it wasn't really planned. He went to the place on the hill at sunset. By chance, he didn't really think exactly that he was going to take that photograph. He saw the tree, he put the couple on the tree, the sun was setting. He knew you didn't have a lot of time to get some good shots. He took a number of different shots, and one in particular, when he was looking at developing the photographs, stood out in particular, because this was a time when taking photographs involved actual real film, and not digital cameras. So that's the reason why. The unknown factor. But anyway, that's the background to the photograph. Now, one October morning, Tom was in his shop. What was he doing? What was he doing in his shop that morning? I do like Ekaterina's idea that it was a UFO that had landed. Perhaps that was the case, but he didn't notice if it was the case. But very, very imaginative idea. So what was Tom doing this one October morning in his shop? Doing the bookkeeping, exactly, Svetlana. He was looking at his accounts, and Michael said he was drinking tea. Yeah, he was drinking tea, he was checking his accounts. It was quite quiet that morning. It was a weekday. He's surprised by a special visitor. Who was this visitor? Who came to his shop that Wednesday morning while he was checking his accounts and drinking some tea? Exactly, Michael. Very good. It was the bride from the photo, not his ex-girlfriend Anastasia, and not an old lady Katerina. It was the bride from his photo. So the special photo in the shop, he hadn't seen that woman since he took the photo many years ago. And the bride turned up. He didn't recognize her though. So obviously many years had gone past. He didn't notice that it was the person from the photo, but she introduced herself as that person. So she introduced herself to Tom. She said she was the bride in the photo that was featured in his window. After a few minutes talking, Tom offered to make the woman some tea, but she refused. She wasn't really very happy about this. And as Tom was talking to her briefly, he noticed that there was something on her mind. What do you think she wanted? What did she want, this woman from the photograph? She wanted the photo. Well, of course, she had copies of the photograph when she got married. She wanted a copy of the photograph. That would be natural, wouldn't it? She wanted to remember she'd lost her copy of it. But no, she didn't want the copy of the photograph. Victoria has guessed it, and Katrinka has also guessed the reason for it. She explains that she's recently moved. She explained that she recently moved back into the town after living elsewhere. And she said she was living with her mother now. I'm sorry, said Tom, immediately thinking that as Katrinkans suggested, that she's broken up with her husband. The woman didn't say that, but Tom either believed that she's broken up and divorced her husband, or perhaps her husband had died. But she said she was living with her mother, and she also said she wanted a big favor, and you've guessed it, Victoria. The woman said she wanted Tom to remove the photograph from the window. The reason being is why? Ludmilla says she wanted to cut it in two halves so she's separated from her hubby. Not exactly, no. I'll tell you. Well, she basically, because she passes the window of the photographer's studio every day on her way to work, and having that photograph there reminding her of her husband, she didn't go into details, but was something that she didn't want to see every day. Now, Tom was very surprised by the woman's request. Did he agree to it, or did he not agree to it? Liv Miller says she was fat in the photo. But exactly, Katrin, she didn't want to suffer on a daily basis. Katerina, that's an interesting idea. I like that, yeah. Perhaps she didn't want her new husband to see her and her ex when she passed. But these things weren't explained. They may have been things that went through Tom's mind when the woman requested this, but it wasn't something that was explained to him. And yes, Svetlana says Tom agreed after a prepayment. Well, Tom thought about asking for money, but then decided against it. He thought it would be rather mean of him. And the woman was so upset that he agreed to it. And Tom said he would remove the photograph at the end of the day. Now, Tom worked hard for the rest of the day, and he started to wonder if he'd made the right decision in agreeing to remove his lucky photograph from the window. What does he do in the end? Does he actually remove the photograph from the window? Nice idea, Maya, to change the face in the photograph with Photoshop. No, he doesn't Photoshop it. He's quite old school. He doesn't even know what Photoshop is, this man. I like some of the backstories that you've been coming up with as well. Lyudmila said the husband had fallen off a cliff in the mountains. Yeah, Katrinkans. Tom decides to remove the photograph and replace it with another similar photograph. One of the other photographs that he'd taken in the same place that he wasn't entirely happy with, but was, pretty good. So he does that. Now, the next day, Tom regrets his decision because of 3 incidents. And what I would like you to do is tell me some of the incidents you think happened. So what happened to make Tom regret removing the photograph? Feedback, Katrinkan says, from the citizens, so people coming into the shop and saying, Tom, what happened to the photograph? Maya lost business. Yeah, exactly, Michael. For the first day in years, Tom does not get any business whatsoever. Nobody comes into the shop. Okay. Now, this is where I stop. So this is the story. It's an open-ended story. And usually the reason why I stop here is because I want the students to complete it. So what I would do is ask the students to continue telling the story. And either I would do that with the students having to write it for homework, for example, and then bring in their versions, swap them, read them to each other, and we vote as a class on which is the best ending of the story. Now I have an idea of how the story ends, but I'm not going to tell you. And usually that is frustrating for the students as well. So usually I can do all sorts of things. If I want to, I can keep it going over various classes, or I can actually do 20 questions, or I can say which of the students guessed the story that was most similar to the one I have in my mind of how it ends. But the most important thing here is not the ending of the story. It's actually activating the imagination and getting students interested and excited. And this is a story I found actually does work. It provokes curiosity. There are a number of different things. There's a mystery involved. Some of the students take it off and make it a very sort of traditional story. Others make it a very sad story. Some turn it into a kind of mysterious conspiracy story about a competitor who has paid a woman to come into his shop and ask Tom to remove the story. But the whole point is not actually how it ends. It's getting the students interested and engaged and having them continue with it. So that's an example of an interactive story. And to answer some of the questions, yes, Katrinkans, I made the story up myself. And thank you for the feedback. Right, so if you wanted to create your own interactive story, and these slides I will give you via Elena, you can have these slides to download. So the story's in there, so the actual story that I told and all of these ideas and links, etc., are in these slides as well. If you want to create your own interactive story, here's some guidelines. I think you need to think of a story that will appeal to your students in particular. Make it sketchy and open-ended, so you can fill in the details and complete the story the way that they want to. You, as you say, you punctuate the story as you go along with questions to ask the students. Now, a lot of those questions, the answers are not particularly interesting. They're not going to affect the outcome of the story. They're just little details. So the name, the place. Some of the answers can be anything. So the name could be anything, the place could be anything, the name of the town, etc. It doesn't really matter. Some of the answers to the questions, have to be specific because you know the direction that the story is going to take. So you have to be careful with that. And what I like about this is that you can adapt your language for the level of students that you're teaching and adapt the story, create the story for the age group of the students. So I think this story originally I actually created for students to practice first conditional. So the way I ended it today wasn't exactly how I ended it in the classroom. I would say there's an extra bit in which Tom puts the photograph back into the window, and Tom thought things through and decided that one of three things was going to happen. Sorry, I've been mixing it up because I also tell the story in the present tense normally, so that makes the students have to submit these answers with the first conditional. So if the woman comes back in, there were three potential endings. basically. So if you have a closed set of endings, then students would actually have to use the first conditional to come up with them, and I'd get them to write the first conditional sentences. If the woman comes back into the studio, X will happen, etc. Or I'm not going to dwell on this because we're running short of time, so I'm going to move on. Another type of interactive storytelling game can be a role-playing game, and I particularly like, so the interactive storytelling game that or interactive stories that I've introduced you to are quite limited and quite sort of scripted. At least the beginning is of the example that I've told you. What I do like about interactive storytelling games that are role-playing games is that they're open-ended. They can be co-created. Usually you need to add an element of randomness with a dice or yes or no or something like that, to have events that are random or outcomes that are random. But you need to take into account the agency of the players, so the agency of the students in our case. They need to have active decisions that affect the progress of the game and the outcome of the game. They need to be engaged with it, or they won't be very engaged with the game. That's one of the reasons why role-playing games are very engaging, I think. And they're usually facilitated by a games master, which would be the role of the teacher. They can be short. The ones that I try and design are meant to take place in one class, one lesson, but you could actually play a game over several classes, moving it along at the beginning of the class, for example. What I used to like to do when I taught young learners back in Spain some years ago was actually have an activity that was very engaging for students, because I had a group of preteens that were always late for class. So I would plan to do something at the beginning of class that was the most fun thing that we would do from the whole lesson. And that would encourage the students to hurry up because they were coming from their school to a private English class. And sometimes they would kind of just be a bit slow in getting there. So I'd encourage them to do that, to turn up on time to the lesson. And it worked. Right, I'm going to look at 3 example storytelling games. One of them is very different from the other 2. They are called Escape the Dinner Party, Get the Treasure and Escape, and A Fortnight in the Valley. And Elena and Michael and others who may well have taken part in the role-playing games for ELT, the RPG ELT Facebook group sessions that we do when we playtest games every week, have seen 2 of these, or may have seen 2 of these, but the other one is new and I haven't yet played it. So the first one is very much set in a setting that would be familiar for students, and the advantage of doing this is because you can use language that students will use in their daily life. So this is a dinner party setting, or whatever kind of social family gathering you want to make it, you could adapt it, where you have the students play the role of someone who's coming to the party but needs to leave on time, and the party, the family, their relatives usually extend the dinner several hours for various reasons, and they have to then socialize, be pleasant with the family, but also to apologize and make excuses for why they have to leave at the end. This can lead to some very interesting, funny excuses being developed. And you as the teacher play the part of the other members of the family, and you can either accept their valid excuses or ask them more details about it, etc. as it goes along. So it's very language focused. It's very focused on apologizing, making excuses and small talk. It's task-based. The students have a specific task to do, or several different tasks, because the details of the game are actually designed. They have to tell certain things to certain people, and of course their cousin David, it's a birthday party, so they have to congratulate and wish David a happy birthday. They have to also give him a present, etc. So I think that's quite interesting, and the outcomes can be quite creative, and you're getting a lot of ideas and all of the language from the students, really. So that's a game. There's a link to it, which will be on the slides, so you could actually take a better look at that. Another game that I played with the RPG and ELT group last week is a very different situation. It's not one that I think most of us would find ourselves in, but I like the idea of taking students out. I mean, that's the role of stories, isn't it? To be able to experience something that is outside of our daily experience. And so this is all about finding treasure on an island. This one is collaborative and interactive. It involves co-creation of a story. So the students themselves come up with the scenario, what the treasure is, where the island is, how they get there, what their role is. So each of the students has a role, a job, a place, a backstory that they can create themselves, which could be as simple or as detailed as you want to. So it depends. If you want the students to have a detailed backstory, then they could play that. Normally, well, this story has sort of a maximum of 5 players. So if you have more than 5 students, they obviously get into groups to play each of the 5 characters, come up with their name and backstory. So that again is pre-game speaking and writing activity. And as part of the game, each of the players decide on a hidden want. So what do they want out of the story that the other characters don't know? And that could be, I want the money for myself. It could be, I want at the end of this to write a best-selling novel about. I'm not worried about the treasure, but I'm actually a journalist. Someone else might have been a government agent who is there because actually the activity is illegal and he's going to arrest the other characters at the end of the game, etc. It's up to the students what hidden wants they want to play. And what you do at the end of the game, as the game is played, there are certain challenges as well that the students also come up with. And you decide on a yes or no system. So I've got these green and red sticks, but it could be pieces of paper with yes or no written on them, or dice, or any other way of randomly deciding the outcomes of the, so overcoming the challenge, you would pull out one of these, and the success of the hidden wants. As the game goes along, the students reveal their hidden want. So if the government agent wants to arrest the students, then the game master would pick out a stick and would then reveal whether it was successful green or unsuccessful red, and so on. And it can lead to quite a lively game, I think. There's a recording of that, so if anyone wants to see it in action, if they go to the RPG and ELT Facebook group, they can see it. And I'm coming to the end of things. So the final game is actually a game based on a map. The map that you see that I've drawn there would be obscured, most of it, so you wouldn't reveal that. And you can either play it with actually map squares, as I've shown here, or you can play it just by talking and describing what the students can see. They start off with X and they end up going to where the exclamation mark is based on their decisions. And again, it's a collaborative, interactive story. It involves the students co-creating the story as they go along, and there are random events that happen and outcomes, some of which the random events are actually decided by the students. Now, if I'm running out of time, and I just want to leave a couple of minutes if I can for questions, but if anyone wants to play this today, then we are playing it in 40 minutes. I have a regular Sunday meeting with a group of language teachers called the Webheads who are interested in technology, and we're going to be playing this game. So if anyone wants to do that, then come and join us, and I'll put the link in the chat after we finish. So I'm going to stop sharing, and if there are any final questions, then please put them in the chat. Otherwise, that's me done.
Okay, thank you, Graham. It was wonderful as usual. Okay, I think that, yeah, there are some questions to you in the chat.
Okay, so Ludmila is asking, I'm just going to put, this is where we're playing the game, and Ludmila is asking about the name of the app to make the hexagon grid. Okay, it's called, I always get this wrong, HexKit. It's called HexKit. Now, I think what I don't want to sort of say to people is that you need this to be able to make them up. You don't. But there's this tool which I came across recently because there was a special offer to get funds for a Black Lives Matters charity, because we all know of the recent sort of disturbances that have been happening in the States and worldwide and protests. And this was included in that bundle of games that that you could buy for very little amount of money. So I thought, oh, this is really interesting. This is a really easy way to make maps. So HexKit, if you Google that, then you'll come across where you can buy it from. And it allows you to very easily create those maps. Now, I can't draw very well, so this is a great tool for me.
Okay, so everybody was fascinated and can't even speak. No more questions. Okay, thank you, Graham. That was great.
A pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. And yeah, let's give a round of applause to Graham to thank him. Okay, thank you very much and hope to see you very soon. Somewhere playing games with us. Okay, yes, and if you have time, so, well, actually today that was our final talk for today, and now you have time to join Graham for the game at another conference. He posted the link in the chat. And I just want to thank everyone for being with us today. Okay, I'll stop.